The wind screamed through the broken teeth of the iron towers that watched over the border outpost, where nothing should have lived, and yet everything that could go wrong somehow did. And Captain Relin stood at attention, with his face stone still, before the tribunal of alien envoys whose eyes shimmered like blood-turned crystal, and who had come to accuse his unit of treason against the Galactic Accord. Private Alira stood behind him, her hands clenched so tight they shook, and the fury burning in her chest could have turned steel soft, because she had watched her friends dragged into those transports without explanation, without charges, and now they expected her to believe the man who gave the orders stood for justice. Relin said nothing as the accusation rang out across the square that he had traded information to the Draxan Confederacy, that his uniform no longer meant loyalty, but deceit, and Alira stepped forward against protocol, against reason, because her voice was the only thing louder than her rage. She shouted that it was a lie, that Relin would never turn, that the only reason those envoys were here was because someone needed a scapegoat, and she would not let her captain be hung for a crime born of politics. When he did not respond, when his silence confirmed every suspicion, her fury found a shape, and that shape was her fist, tearing at the seam of his shoulder patch, where the insignia of Earth Command glinted cold in the thin sun. The patch came away with a hiss and a rip that sounded louder than gunfire in the stunned silence, and she drove her hands down the seam of his chestplate, stripping it open with the strength only fury gives. And as the fabric gave way, she saw not skin, not metal, not blood. What stared back at her was light, a soft, dull blue light pulsing beneath the mesh of something not quite organic, not quite machine. And lines of alien script flowed across his skin. No, not skin. Armor. No, not armor. Something that moved with him, breathed with him. Alira staggered back, not because she feared him, but because her mind could not place what she saw within any known catalog, and Relin just stood there, eyes closed, like he had been waiting for this moment, for someone to see and to stop pretending. The envoys did not speak, the crowd did not breathe, and Alira's voice had gone somewhere she could not reach. Because she had been angry, because she had wanted truth, and the truth was now before her, wrapped in ancient glyphs that shimmered like prophecy. Relin looked at her then, and said softly, "Id not betray the accord. I am what it fears," and the ground beneath her feet suddenly felt far too fragile. They took him into custody, but not with chains, not with force, for the envoys did not touch him. They simply stepped back and let the containment field swallow him like a shadow falling on a brighter shape, and Alira watched his face vanish behind the prism glass. The rest of the outpost collapsed into whispers and fear and confusion. But Alira walked alone through the barracks, through the old archives, through the dust and silence, until she found the restricted chamber where the files were kept, that no one was allowed to read without a clearance high enough to make stars blink. She did not care anymore. She bypassed the lock with grit and wire, and something deeper than training, something that told her there were answers here buried like bones beneath a friendly grave. She found the project name buried under old Earth Command black seals, and she found the photos of men grown from test tubes, not born, but engineered, and she saw Relin's face in every decade, unmoved, unchanged, unlabeled because names were not given to weapons, only designations. Her hands trembled as she traced the notes that spoke of hybrid memory fusion, of gene-stitched biology, of something found deep beneath the Martian crust, a fragment of an artifact too advanced, too ancient, and fused into a man because someone thought it would make a better soldier. And Relin had served silently for over a century. They called it a hearing, but it was a spectacle, the kind that filled feeds across the stars, where everyone watching hoped for a clean answer, a villain, a monster, not a man. Alira sat in the third row, her presence not required, not wanted, but not challenged, and when Relin was brought forward in his containment shell, they had stripped him of all visible rank, and yet still, he stood like a captain, The envoys asked him when he had turned. He said he had not. They asked him what he was, and he said he did not know, only that he had always obeyed until the moment he realized the commands he followed served only those who feared his existence. When they pressed him for allegiance, he gave none. When they demanded contrition, he offered none. When they accused him of being a weapon, he only asked them this: "If I am a weapon, then who pointed me?" And the silence that followed broke across every system watching. Alira stood then and spoke without clearance, without invitation, because truth does not wait for permission. And she told them what she found. And she told them that if he was made by Earth, then Earth must answer for him, not abandon him. And if they feared what he was, then they feared their own creation. She finished with this: "You do not imprison fire for burning. You ask who struck the spark." The verdict came not as law but as fracture, for the accord had never faced its reflection before. And now systems questioned, orders questioned, histories questioned. What else had been buried beneath protocol and pretense? Some called for Relan to be studied. Some called for him to be exiled. Some called for him to be destroyed. But a few stood up and said, "Let him speak." And when Relan spoke, it was not in defense, but in hope. He spoke of the dreams he remembered that did not belong to him, planets seen through eyes that were not human, of memories that hummed in his chest like echoes through a canyon. He said, "I am not yours to judge, because you do not understand what I am. And I am not yours to fear, because I do not choose to be what they made." He said, "I am the bridge or I am the bomb, and only you can decide which." And for the first time, the accord had no answer, only silence. Alira met his eyes across the chamber and saw not a captain, not a weapon, not a secret. She saw someone who had never asked to be made, but still stood for others. They did not release him, but they did not erase him. He was moved to a place without name, a station between stars, where he could walk without chains and speak without command. And Alira was given transfer orders that she tore in half before the ink dried. She left the uniform folded on her bunk, and took a shuttle that asked no questions because questions no longer mattered. She found him standing before a viewport, looking at a nebula that pulsed with the same light she once saw beneath torn fabric. He said, "You came." She said, "I should have come sooner." He asked, "Do you still see me as a captain?" She said, "I see you as a man." He smiled for the first time. And Alira took his hand. She would remember the sound of that rip the first moment she saw what was beneath. But more than that, she would remember the silence that followed. The silence that meant truth had finally spoken. And someone had listened.